Hello, Cleveland. I'm Alan Keller from the Too Much Effing Perspective podcast, and welcome to Quick Taps, our short cast where we ask our friends to confide in us their Spinal Tap moments that they'd much rather forget. After all, what are friends for except to rip open old wounds? And speaking of friends, today we're going to talk to Shane Solosky, musician, producer, and owner-operator of Misphonia Studios out here in LA. Misphonia is where my band Happyless, Happiless, recorded our one and only album, which you can hear on Spotify and iTunes. Shane and I met through Bobby McIntyre, who was the second drummer in the Falling Wallendas. And those two guys became friends with the sons of some of the Bee Gees. And this story is going to be about a universal truth, which is if you're recording at Barry Gibb's studio, you really should drink your beer out of a sippy cup.
Me and Bobby used to play with all the Bee Gees sons in Miami. And we would all hang out at the Bee Gees studio. Robin's son, Spencer, who I played in his band, and Bobby played in his band as well. He had a little room where he had an old tape machine set up, and we would go record songs and hang out at the studio. So the Bee Gees had this big, massive studio, and there was like in the back, there was this, they called it the cage. It was where they stored all the equipment, like all the guitar amplifiers, all the microphones and all that. And we would just go back there and we'd sit on guitar amps and drink beers and tell stories and, just stupid whatever you do when you're 20 years old. And so I remember one day I'm sitting on a guitar amp. I can see it plain as day. I was sitting on a Vox amplifier, which is pretty famous. Like the Beatles used to play Vox amplifiers, right? So I'm sitting on this Vox and I could tell it was old, but it was in pristine condition, like museum quality condition. And I reach for my beer and it spills all over this beautiful 1960s Vox. And I'm like, how am I going to clean it up? And Spencer's like, oh man, that's John's amp. And John was the guy who was the recording engineer for the Bee Gees and ran the studio. Probably one of the most anal guys I've ever met in my life. So I said, oh my God, like John is so anal, he's going to freak out. He goes, oh no, not that John. That's John Lennon's Vox amplifier that he played the last ever Beatles concert at Candlestick Park with.
You really got to wonder how Shane was able to stay alive after that one. Get it? Like staying alive? I know, that sucked. That is the kind of joke that will start the whole world crying. Okay, enough of that. Our next guest is producer and voice actor Pete Sepanek. Pete learned that the best way to get the respect of famed director Brian DePalma is to fuck up some shit. And in case you're wondering, Brian DePalma has no relation to Betsy DePalma, who was the hottest girl at my high school in Milwaukee. Here's Pete.
This is the very first time I've ever told this story publicly, like on a recorded device, I should say. I believe I may have signed an NDA back in 1994, but I'll just sort of, but who knows? Anyway, so back in 1994, I was working for Gail Ann Hurd, big time action producer, did the Terminator movies and Aliens and The Abyss and is now well known for the Walking Dead series. And she had just split up from the director, Brian DePalma. And they were still had a business together, but they were getting divorced. My job was to be both of their assistants. So I'd spend like 3 days a week just being Gail's assistant, then 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, sort of being both of their assistants. So I'd go back and forth between the office of Gail's at Paramount and Brian DePalma's house, where he lived and worked. So one day, the woman who ran the office said, hey, can you go pick up Brian DePalma's television set? It was at the repair shop. So I said, all right, cool. I go and I pick up Brian's TV. So Brian's TV had been basically destroyed during the Northridge quake of 94. And I was just picking it up and it had been like 6 months in the repair shop. So I go to pick it up, and it turns out it's this massive 200-pound television set. It needs two huge guys that are about the size of Bluto from Popeye to put it into my Honda, in order to get it out there. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, geez, now I got to figure out how I'm going to get this TV out of my car into Brian's house. So basically, I take this 200-pound TV. I don't know how I got it out of my car. I put it down on the top part of the driveway before I drive down there. I get back in my car. I open the gate. The gate opens up. I drive down, park my car, and just as I'm parking the car, I hear this. I'll never forget that sound. I look in my rearview mirror, and there's the TV face down at the top of the hill. So I freak out. I run up the hill. I pick up the TV, and mind you, this is like 200 pounds. I don't know how I got it down from the top of the hill down into the house. I get it into the house. I put it on the little counter there. I plug it in. I turn it on, and all I see is zzz, zzz, like this electrode in the center of the screen, like Frankenstein's laboratory. Zzz, zzz. I'm like, oh my God, I totally broke the TV. So I did what any 24-year-old would do. I just decided I'm going to lie about it. So basically, I picked up the phone. I called the TV repair company. I said, yeah, I don't know what's going on with this TV, but it's not working. You guys didn't fix it. And the guy there is like, well, okay, I'm so sorry. We'll come out, send two guys out, and we'll fix it. I was like, no. I was like, don't come here. I'm like, I don't want Brian, because Brian wasn't there. I took the TV. I put it back in my car. I drove it back to the TV place, dropped it off, drove back to Paramount. About an hour later, by the way, I was both the receptionist and I had my own line. So I would pick up, the main line, and I'd be like, hi, Pacific Western Productions. This guy goes, yeah, hi, this is Miles from George Meyer Television. And I'm just asking about that TV. Was it dropped between when it left here and when it came back? And I go, I don't know. I don't know anything about a TV. I pretend like it was somebody else. I don't know anything about no TV. I'll have to ask around, He's like, okay, because it looked like it was dropped. I'm like, geez. So I hung up the phone, and I went into the business manager, and I was like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what they're saying. And so basically she said, well, if it's broken, then we'll just buy Brian a new TV. I said, yeah, maybe I bumped it. I don't really know. What happened? Okay, now prior to this, Brian he wasn't like mean to me, but he didn't engage me in conversation. So the next day, after he found out that the TV had been broken and that I'd been the responsible party for breaking it, and I saw him, he's like, hey, how you doing? Couldn't have been nicer. Like, that's how I gained his respect. I'm like, hey, this is fantastic. What else can I break?
And for our last story today, we're going to hand the mic back to Shane Solosky, who by now has got to be persona non grata at Barry Gibb's studio.
Right before the pandemic, I went to Miami, and I was going to write songs with Stevie Gibb, Barry's son. Stevie's one of my best friends. So we're working at his dad's studio, which is now, they sold their studio. It's a parking lot. They tore it down, turned it into a parking lot, like all great things. And so we're working out of Barry's studio in the house, and there's a bunch of guitars hanging up on the walls. So I'm looking at all the guitars, and I recognized the one that Barry Gibb played on the Midnight Special. And then there was one hanging up that I think he may have played in the video for Jive Talking or Staying Alive or Night Fever, like one of those old videos, the little Rickenbacker guitar. So I'm like, well, I got to get the story on these guitars, right? I'm like, some of them I could tell were Stevie's, and I just wanted to, like, hey, which ones are yours? Which ones are your dad's? So he's pointing, and he's like, that's mine. That's my dad's. That's my dad's. That's my dad's. That's mine. That's mine. That's mine. And the last guitar was this old Gibson J47, probably from the 50s. And he goes, that's my dad's guitar. He goes, real interesting story. Eric Clapton gave him that guitar. Eric Clapton wrote Layla on that. And Clapton is the whole reason that the Bee Gees live in Miami, because they were all on RSO Records. And Clapton said, you guys need to come record in Miami. It's fun. There's nobody here. You won't be distracted. You can just go into this great studio and work. So I had no idea Eric Clapton and Barry Gibb were friends. You don't think they seem like the kind of guys who hang out, but apparently they're like great friends. And Eric Clapton gives Barry Gibb the guitar he wrote Layla on as a present. So me and Stevie are going to write some music, and he grabs a guitar and picks it up, and he hands me the Layla guitar.
Wow.
Oh my God. I'm going to write a song on the same guitar that Eric Clapton wrote Layla on. Like, I'm losing my mind. So I pick it up and I go to tune it and I break the tuning head right off. It fell to pieces. The little piece on top broke off, and then the actual metal mechanism dislodged from the guitar and was hanging there. I had to take at least $2 million off the value right there.
Kurt Cobain's guitar just went for like $4.5 million in auction. Can you imagine what that guitar would be worth if Shane hadn't fucked it up? Well, who am I to talk? I cracked the block on my dad's brand new Fiat when I was a kid. Anyway, if you enjoyed this TMEP show Quick Tap and want us to crank out more of them, let us know at hello@tmepshow.com. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Tune in next week when Alex and I return to our regular format and reveal more celebrity Spinal Tap moments on the TMEP Show.
Although it would be as great as having armadillos in our trousers, this podcast is not affiliated with This Is Spinal Tap, and no person or entity connected with the film has sponsored or endorsed its content. This podcast is not affiliated, sponsored, or licensed by Authorized Spinal Tap LLC or Century of Progress Productions. Evergreen Podcast Network.